Is Alexander Isak angling for a move to Arsenal? Thomas Tuchel has been named England boss, but are the FA right to have overlooked the English candidates? Jonas Eidevall is no longer the Arsenal women's boss. Where did it all go wrong for the Swede? We'll get into all of that and more on today's episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, hope you're all good, hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining me on another live episode of the podcast. Apologies for the lack of a show yesterday. As you guys will know, those of you that listen regularly, I've had a sore throat for a few days now, and I've been struggling to sit and do these without basically coughing my guts out throughout the episode. So I decided to take a day off yesterday. I can't promise that I won't cough at least once on today's episode, but feeling a lot better, and there's plenty of news to get into. As I say, we're going to talk about this latest report concerning the future of Alexander Isak. We're going to discuss Thomas Tuchel, who's given his first press conference as the new England boss today. I thought it was quite interesting. And we're going to discuss Jonas Eidevall, who is no longer the Arsenal women's boss. He resigned, a few minutes after we finished the last episode. So we'll get into some of the fallout from that as well. Don't forget, if you haven't done so already, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, all the rest of it. If you want to support the podcast and get access to additional content, you can do so by visiting our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/The Chronicles of a Gooner. Head over there, subscribe, and let me know what you think of the additional content. Let's get into today's show then, and let's start, I think, with the Thomas Tuchel news, because I think a lot of people were caught out by this. A lot of people, thought that England were going to persist with Lee Carsley. Obviously, he'll stay in the role until January when Thomas Tuchel takes over. But at the start of Carsley's tenure, everybody thought, this is the guy, and we just need to give him a bit of time. Now, obviously, things haven't gone the way that Lee Carsley would have liked. The result against Greece wasn't great. Some of the performances have been pretty underwhelming, but at the end of the day, now that I look back on it and now that I look at it with hindsight, I don't think it was ever the plan for Lee Carsley to stay on longer than this 3-camp stint that he referred to in a recent press conference. I don't think he's got the charisma to do the job. I don't think he's got the personality required to handle all the flack that comes your way when you're England boss. I think he's a good coach, a coach who tried something different against Greece, and it went horribly wrong for him. And that can happen to anyone, even the very, very best. But it's very, very clear now, isn't it, that England only ever put Carsley in position as a bit of a placeholder, and that the plan was always going to be to move on and find someone else. And I want to touch on some of the key points from Thomas Tuchel's press conference, which he gave today. He said he's very excited and honoured to be England boss. He called this group of players very special and exciting. He said he was well aware of the differences in routine and rhythm between club and international football. He says he wants to push England over the line and make sure that they get that second star on their shirt, obviously by winning the 2026 World Cup. Now, he's only got an 18-month contract, Thomas Tuchel, which I find interesting, because when you go into a job as a manager, you want to feel wanted, and you want to feel like the club or the football association or the federation of that country has got full 100% faith and trust in you. I don't know how you ever give that message to a coach, though, when you only give them an 18-month contract. And 18 months in international management, you feel like is even less time than it would be in the club game, because you don't have these players on a day-to-day basis. You don't get to work with them week in, week out. You pick them up 3-4 times a year in certain camps, and you've got to make the most of that time. And it's a very, very difficult job and a very, very different job. I'm surprised that Thomas Tuchel has gone into international management. You can bet that the FA's salary is going to be a big one, and you can bet that Thomas Tuchel would have demanded top dollar. Why not? He's a proven coach, and he's head and shoulders above anything else that I think England were able to, or anyone else that England were able to attract at this point. We'll come on to the nationality question in a minute, because I think that's a really, really big talking point around all of this. He apologised for having a German passport when a question along the lines of, what do you say to the England fans that would feel that an Englishman should have got the job, etc., etc. It's clear that he really, really impressed in the interview process, because as was revealed, and there wasn't any more names given or any further information, but it looks like the FA interviewed about 10 candidates, and Thomas Tuchel obviously came out on top. He said that he doesn't want to reinvent the wheel. He's not trying to change things drastically. What he's trying to do is build on Gareth Southgate's success. And I can imagine people will be screaming back at me saying, what success? England didn't win anything under Gareth Southgate. But, well, they went further than England teams have gone in the last 50 or 60 years. So by that metric and by that logic, you have to say that Gareth Southgate's tenure was successful. Gary Neville's been reacting to this, and he says that having worked under Fabio Capello as a coach, and obviously having been managed by Sven-Göran Eriksson, he realised later on in his career that by appointing those two guys, and by appointing foreign coaches, it's not specific to those two guys, English coaches were significantly damaged, which I think is a nonsense. Gary Neville said that there were outstanding English candidates that could have been appointed, and my reaction to that was, well, who? You look at some of the tabloids and the way that they've reported on this, and not that you'd expect much from them, but some of the reaction has been ridiculous. I saw a headline on the back page of one of the English tabloids that said, "A dark day for English football." Well, because a German's been appointed as the head coach. Look, let's come to the question of, does it matter that he's not English? Of course it doesn't bloody matter that he's not English, okay? At the end of the day, you want to appoint the person that is best for the job. Now, I agree that in an ideal world, that person would be English in this case, or from the nation that they're going to represent, because there would be probably a drive that comes from a patriotism within them that might push them on that little bit further. But I think when you're someone who's been as successful as Thomas Tuchel has been throughout his career, having gone and managed in different countries and having done really, really well in all of those places, you get to a point where you just got to look at him and say he's a top pro, and the fact that he's German doesn't really matter. If you are really someone who wants England to succeed and go on and win major trophies, you need to look at the coaching pool available to the FA, which, given all the noises we've heard, comprises of, in terms of the people that we think were considered, Graham Potter and Eddie Howe. Beyond that, who else is there? You know, Harry Redknapp's been on TV spouting nonsense like Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard should have been considered, which is rubbish in my opinion. You know, you think about who was available to England from that English pool, and what they have done is gone out and hired the best in class. And it doesn't matter that he's not English. England stand a far better chance of winning a tournament under Thomas Tuchel than they would under Eddie Howe or they would under Graham Potter. I genuinely believe that. This is a guy who's got a proven track record of going and winning competitions. He's very, very good in knockout competitions. He's got the personality and the experience, and he's been in high-pressured environments before, and I'm confident he will handle this job better than a lot of those managers would. Maybe it's good that it's someone who can detach themselves a little bit. Maybe that's what the England job needs. Someone who doesn't feel the weight of the nation on their shoulders every time their team walks out. Someone who isn't going to be bothered by the flack and criticism that will come their way, or the scrutiny around every single decision that they make. Thomas Tuchel's proven throughout his career that he is ruthless enough when he needs to be, that he's not afraid to make big decisions. People point to the fact that he's fallen out with quite a few players over the years. I don't think that's as likely to happen on the international stage, where you only see these players sort of once every few months. I think the day-to-day can get a bit much under Thomas Tuchel because he is so meticulous, because some people say that he is really, really fussy and really, really demanding. But I just think, you know, as far as this goes, England have done what gives them the greatest chance of going on and winning that World Cup. And for that, they should be applauded. For the fact that they're open-minded enough to not say he has to be English, and to not be, you know, insistent on putting someone into the job who doesn't necessarily deserve it. I think that's something you should give the FA credit for, not criticise them for. I think if you're talking about two coaches going head-to-head for the role, right? Let's say that the FA managed to narrow it down to the final two candidates. One of them was an Englishman who, is really super passionate about the job, is a 7 out of 10. And then the other candidate is the German candidate, who's a 7.5 out of 10. If there isn't that much difference, I can understand why the FA would lean towards the Englishman, knowing that that's probably what the majority of people want. And that's a guy that the majority of English people will probably get behind. However, this is not the case in this instance. Thomas Tuchel is an 8 out of 10 coach. Eddie Howe is a 6 out of 10 coach. Graham Potter is a 6 out of 10 coach. When you're talking about the elite level, none of them have managed at that level. None of them have got anywhere near the heights that Thomas Tuchel has. Will they in time? Maybe. Who knows? But they're not there today. And so the FA have spotted and identified that chasm in quality between where Thomas Tuchel is and all the English candidates, and they've decided to do what is best for the players. They owe it to the players as well. This is a really talented group of English players. It's maybe the most talented group of English players, at least at the top end of the pitch, that I've ever seen. And so you owe it to them to make the right call, to make the right decision. For years and years and years, we've had criticism of Gareth Southgate. He's not tactically astute enough. His in-game management isn't good enough. The FA have heard you. They've listened, and they've gone out and got one of the most tactically astute managers of the last decade, one of the best in-game managers in Thomas Tuchel, and people are still complaining about it. I just don't understand it. People keep saying this is damaging to English coaches, and this is what's holding English coaches back. I've seen all sorts of nonsense on social media from people saying, oh, it's because we've got so many foreign owners in the Premier League that they prefer to hire and appoint foreign coaches. Let's take Arsenal as an example. American owners. Why would an American owner prefer a Spanish coach over an English coach? What would be the reasoning behind that? If it was an American owner and they appointed an American coach, then you could look at it and you could say, well, maybe there's a bit of favoritism, there's a bit of bias there. The best coaches around at the minute tend to be Spanish coaches, Italian coaches. How many Premier League clubs are owned by a Spaniard? The answer is 0. How many Premier League clubs are owned or have been owned by Italians over the years? Not very many. Watford with the Pozzos. There's been investment in other clubs, maybe at Leeds United. But generally speaking, the coaches that they hire are not from the same countries that the ownership comes from. You don't get the Qataris and sort of, the Saudis and stuff going and appointing Qatari and Saudi coaches, because it's not about where they're from. It's about how good they are. And the truth is that English coaching is not at the same standard as some of the other nationalities, as some of the other nations. And that's why they're looking elsewhere for their bosses. Eddie Howe, if he proves himself, one day might become England boss. But he took on Newcastle United, turned them around, got them into the Champions League. Following season, there was a huge drop-off. So he hasn't shown that he can consistently punch at the highest level. Graham Potter did really, really well and did admirable things with Brighton and Hove Albion. Moved on to Chelsea. Yes, it's a basket case of a club and there's lots of chaos going on behind the scenes there. But he showed that he couldn't handle that kind of environment. What do you think the England environment's going to be like? Where everybody sitting on their armchairs at home thinks they know better than you. How are you going to handle that if you can't handle what was going on at Stamford Bridge? So I think the FA have made the right decision. I wouldn't be surprised if they go on and win the World Cup now. I think it's a great appointment. I think everybody should be pleased by it. And I think this conversation around whether he's English or not and the problems that may or may not cause is a pointless one, to be honest with you. Thomas Tuchel's not going to turn up in a World Cup and not want to succeed because he's German. Like that isn't the case. That goes against his professionalism, against everything that he is. And if he was that way inclined and that was his way of thinking, he wouldn't be where he is now in terms of his standing in the game. So all of that is a load of nonsense to me, and I don't think it's a conversation that people need to have moving forward. Get behind him, support him, and I'm sure he'll do good things. You wanted someone more tactically astute, that's exactly what you've got. You wanted someone who has proven himself at the elite level of club football, and he's done that. This is bad news, though, for Manchester United, because if they were thinking about moving on from Erik ten Hag, Thomas Tuchel would have been one of the standout candidates, wouldn't he? But obviously, he's decided to take this job with the FA. If I just go over into the comments, let me say a few hellos because there's plenty of you watching with us. Remember, if you haven't done so already, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, sign up to our Patreon page, patreon.com/The Chronicles of Aguna. You know the drill by now. Big hello to Lloyd, Vlad, Wandering Minstrel, Bad Boy, Canterbury, Guna. Bart is with us. We've got Ant. We've got G-Star, Jacko's Therapy. Lots and lots of you having your say on this story around Thomas Tuchel. Ant says, only Greece have won a trophy with a foreign manager from the European trophy winners in recent history. Yes, but I'll tell you where this differs, okay? So, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, the teams that you'd associate as being the usual suspects when it comes to who's going to win a European trophy, they don't need to go and search elsewhere for good coaches because they have them themselves. England have a really weak pool of what you would consider as high-level coaches. It doesn't stack up against the Spanish. It doesn't stack up against the German coaches. Like, you're not going to put Eddie Howe and Graham Potter in the same bracket as Julian Nagelsmann or Hansi Flick, people that have managed Germany recently. Didier Deschamps at France has been incredibly successful over a long period of time. That's why he's still in the job. When it comes to the Spanish, they're levels above everyone at the moment when it comes to football and philosophy and then translating that out onto the pitch. So, yeah, Greece went with a foreign manager. They went with Otto Rehhagel in Euro 2004. But Greece are not a big, significant footballing nation. They spotted an opportunity to bring in someone who could raise their level by bringing greater knowledge, greater tactical insight. That's what they did, and he came in and he was successful. England, in theory, shouldn't need to go down that path, but the reality is that they do at this moment in time. That's what they've chosen to do, and I think it's the right decision. But anyway, enough about Thomas Tuchel, enough about England. Let's turn our attentions to Jonas Eidevall, who has resigned as the Arsenal women's boss. Now, this comes after a disappointing start to the season. They find themselves off the pace in the WSL already. They've dropped far too many points at this early stage. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and claim to be an expert on the women's team or, go into sort of tactical analysis as to where or how it might have gone wrong for him. What I will say is, though, is that Arsenal are at the forefront of growing the women's game and driving it forward. Getting 60,000 crowds at the Emirates. That's an incredible thing. Years ago, to have got that kind of crowd in a women's game was unthinkable. But now we're in a place where it's happening, which shows the growth of the game. And Arsenal, as I keep saying, are at the forefront of that. They're leaders. They're pioneers in that sense. But the club has moved so far forward in terms of the women's game with marketing, with getting people in the stadium, getting bums on seats, all of that stuff, that there is now a pressure and there's a desperation for the team to succeed. And unfortunately, the level on the pitch is lacking and they've fallen behind in that sense. And if you want to be the leaders in women's football, which Arsenal are in so many ways, you cannot allow the team to suffer. You cannot allow the team to fall behind, because all of a sudden your product doesn't marry up with what people are seeing on the pitch, and that can cause disinterest. And I honestly think that given that they only managed to sell, and it sounds mad me saying this because 3 years ago to do this would have been unthinkable, but the fact that they only got 45,000 at the Emirates the other day in comparison to the 60-odd thousand that they've managed in recent times, that said to me that the support for Jonas Eidevall was dwindling. The club would have looked at that and thought, we're going to sell out these Emirates games. That's what we're aiming to do. And when they realised that that wasn't going to happen, and there was 15-odd thousand tickets left over, that would have set alarm bells ringing. That would have said that there's a bit of a disconnect now between the fans and what's happening on the pitch. And Jonas Eidevall has resigned as a result of that. Wish him all the best. I think overall he's done a good job. I think he's tried to reinvent things and change things. Hasn't all gone as he'd have liked. But wish him all the best in the future. And Arsenal now have to look elsewhere. They've appointed an interim coach, but they'll need to hire someone on a permanent basis very, very soon. Told you I'd get a cough in at some point. Hopefully I hit the mute button in time. Not to deafen anybody listening on their headphones. Just a quick reminder, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, check out Patreon, all the rest of it. Get involved in the live chat as well. Just going back to the England manager thing, lots of people having their say on this in the live chat. Salah says, there is nothing wrong with hiring quality foreign managers. Even Unai Emery is a better coach than the overrated pool of coaches that are English. The way you say that, like even Unai Emery is head and shoulders above an Eddie Howe or a Graham Potter. There's no doubt about that in my mind. What else have we got? Kian Lewis says, I'm starting to really feel an attachment to the Arsenal women, would like to start getting tickets. Mate, go for it. They go on general sale. It's certainly much more viable than getting tickets for the men's team at the minute, which is really, really difficult and really, really tough. Go along. I went a couple of times last season and I thought the standard was really, really good. And listen, call me naive, call me whatever you like. I really turned up, maybe, not knowing how good it had got, not understanding how many steps forward women's football in general and at the very elite clubs had taken. And I was pleasantly surprised. And I'm now much more invested. Still not as invested as I should be and could be, but that's a time issue for me. It's very difficult to focus on and cover the men's team the way I do and then prepare for games like Bolton's under 20 or Bolton against Aston Villa's under 21s in the EFL trophy and be across games in the WSL as well. It's tough. It's difficult. But the standard is better. It's improving all the time, and I encourage you to get down there and support them if you can. It's not because I don't want to. It's because I struggle with juggling so many things. But it's definitely on the up and definitely worth checking out. But yeah, going back to Eidevall before we move on to our main story of the day and wrap up the show, I just think that the club were moving so fast on one side. When it wasn't moving on the pitch, that's when the problem started. And there has been noises around Jonas Eidevall, and there's been question marks around some of his methods in the past, and I just think it got to the point where it was the best thing for everyone. I think the club did a good thing in letting Jonas Eidevall resign. They'd have had that conversation, obviously, and it shows us, I think, as Arsenal supporters, that the club are willing to be ruthless when they need to be. I know a lot of people said that maybe KSE, yeah, great, they put these long-term coaches in, but do they have the cojones then to pull the plug on them when it's not working? We haven't seen that with Mikel Arteta. Why would we? Because the team's progressing. But they've taken a decision with the women's team. That decision has obviously been communicated to Jonas Eidevall, who has then been able to leave with his head held high and walked away from the job. Okay, let's move on to our main story, which is with regards to Alexander Isak. Now, I know I've put it in the title. I know I've put it as the headline. But I want to start off by saying I'm not sure how much you can read into this. Call me a clickbaiter, call me whatever you want. But I read stuff like this sometimes and I just want to bang my head against a desk. Like, Alexander Isak has got a contract at Newcastle United until 2028. That's 4 years away. Why on earth would anybody of sane mind, even if you were playing for Real Madrid, why on earth would you commit your long-term future beyond that point at this stage in the contract? It's mad. Newcastle United are a club that we thought were going to rise to success really, really quickly, given the wealth that obviously came in. The Saudi ownership makes them the most wealthy club in the world, but obviously PSR and all the rules and regulations around what they can and can't spend have put the brakes on when it comes to that project. They've not been able to accelerate away from everybody in the way that maybe people thought might happen, or in the way I'm sure they would have liked. But they're at a point where they got players like Alexander Isak, a top talent, who is worth a hell of a lot of money, but still has 4 years to run on his contract. Why would A, Newcastle panic, but B, why would Alexander Isak want to sign for another 2 years or 3 years on top of that when he doesn't know how the project's going to go? If Newcastle continue to be hampered by the rules and regulations and fail to get this project off the ground in the way that we all thought they would when the investment came in, then why would Alexander Isak want to stay there? The only way Alexander Isak signs a new contract with Newcastle is if it's on improved terms. But why would he want to add years onto the end of it without knowing how the next few seasons are going to unfold? Without knowing who the manager's going to be going forward? If Eddie Howe, for example, doesn't stay on, which is a real possibility given some of the grumblings around him and the club's hierarchy in recent times. It just, to me, this just feels like a non-story. Like, we're talking about a guy who's got 4 years left on his contract as if he's in the last 12 months and he's stalling. That's not what's going on here. So don't read into this too much. Spoken about him before. He's a player I hugely admire, a player that I think would add so much to our forward line. Naturally, really, really gifted footballer. My one reservation about Isak has always been injuries and his ability to stay fit. And it's why I would have been hesitant around spending north of the 150 mark that people were talking about in the past. I'd be careful with what I pay for him for that reason. But he's a superb footballer, and there's no reason you wouldn't want him at Arsenal. It's just, A, is it a realistic deal to do? And the answer in the summer was no. And the answer was largely because he's on that long-ass contract that you're going to have to pay a fortune to get him out of. But then by the same token, we're talking about him stalling on signing an extension or a new one, when by the same token, we're saying it's a really long contract, then that gives Newcastle the power. So this is a non-story for me. This is a classic international break story. Not a great deal to talk about, not a great deal to sink your teeth into. And it's the use of, this is in my personal opinion, I'm not seeking to bash any journalist or anybody that reports this, but this feels like someone using a previous link and a previous connection and trying to turn that into an international break story when things are moving, a little bit slowly. But yeah. Let's have a look at what you guys are saying in the chat. PTM Production says, how much is Isak being paid? I don't know. And the only reason I think that's a relevant point. And I think it's a relevant point because I guess what you're suggesting is that he would sign a new contract if his earnings were to increase. Newcastle will probably say, we're not going to put you on a bigger contract unless you commit to a longer period. But you can understand why Isak wouldn't want to do that. So it's kind of, that's where the negotiation is between Newcastle and Isak around salary and what he'd need to do, i.e. commit longer in order to encourage them to give him that greater salary. That's where there could be a negotiation. That's where things might be at a bit of a standstill. But to suggest that the fact that that standstill or that standoff hasn't been broken yet, and that's because he's eyeing a move to Arsenal in the near future, I think is really, really premature. And I think is someone getting carried away with something this big and essentially making it into a big deal like this. So yeah. AJ says Newcastle blame Arsenal for their constraints, which makes any deal really hard. We know that Arsenal are one of the clubs that are against the state-sponsored ownership. Newcastle deny that it's state-sponsored ownership, but I think that's up for debate. They're against this type of investment coming into football clubs. We've been called part of the red cartel, along with Manchester United and Liverpool, the traditionalist clubs that don't want to see the new era dawn upon us. That's what people accuse us of. But I really do look at this and I just think, there is a bit of bad blood there. There is a bit of a bad feeling. It does make it harder for us to do deals with them. They sided with Manchester City in a lot of things. Arsenal sided with the Premier League, with that whole debacle going on. So, yeah, the relationship is probably a little bit strained, which makes the claim that him refusing to commit beyond another 4 years is because he thinks that Arsenal are going to come in and swoop in for him even more out there than it would have been before we started this conversation. So yeah, interesting stuff. Interesting that this has come up and cropped up again, but I don't really think there are any legs to it. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining me on today's live episode. Remember, leave a like on the video. There's nowhere near enough likes on the board. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Make sure you check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/The Chronicles of a Gooner. And we'll be back tomorrow at some point with another episode of the pod. What we'll discuss, I don't know yet. It's the international break. Things are a bit slow, but we'll definitely be with you on Friday morning, where we're going to preview Saturday's trip to Bournemouth. That's going to be a tough one, I think. Andoni Iraola's side play some good stuff. And, nighttime, under the lights, down on the south coast. It's going to be wet, probably. It's going to be windy. It's a potential banana skin of a fixture. Let's see how that one goes. We'll preview that in depth on Friday's episode. I'll see you tomorrow. Until then, take care of yourselves. Have a good one. Up the Arsenal. Goodbye.